A warm welcome to you to our conference, to the Economic Times Global Digital League. And with that, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your introduction. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to our friends in India and the rest of the world. This is my second participation with Economic Times. Honored to be there today along with Dr. Mirza. And well, the introduction is artificial intelligence and everything. This is the theme. What has COVID-19 did it a favor and accelerated it in every area of the business. Before we get to the details of AI and e-payment and the security aspects of it, well, for those of you, which I'm sure everybody by now knows what is artificial intelligence, but just to simplify it, is mimicking human behavior, actions, thinking, but with a bigger capacity of data, bigger access, faster and rapid transactions around the world, and making learning through machine learnings and deep learnings a way to move forward with it. Just give you an example before we get there. You all have heard of Moderna in US, the latest vaccine that has came up, and I believe there is a great percentage of success goes along with it. But what many of you probably don't realize is that that vaccine, which has an edge over others, and few new ones that are done even in US and UK, the main reason of their success is artificial intelligence. AI, for instance, on Moderna vaccine has reduced the humans' analysis and actions, which have been estimated at 8 years at the best. 8 years at the best from the time they started, which was a few months ago, to 245 days. So imagine the amount of processing that AI does compared to the human being. And I'm talking about the huge number of human beings being engaged in that. So the future is AI, and as the lady said, it's there already. We've been talking about it last year and the year before. I've written 4 books in the last 3 years, but everybody thought this is a science fiction, like movies that were in place. Of course, AI started in 1915 by John McCarthy, a professor in US, but it has not taken the toll to become so much engaged in our life, but it is there now. Is there in everywhere and everything. Now, of course, the pandemic cornered us in our houses. It kept us away from ATM machines. It kept us away from payments to the shops, going to order them. But that was only a part of it. And here I must distinguish, before we start, a difference between AI and what you all know as digital transformation or digitalization. And we will categorize in a minute the banks, for instance. The banks those are the cumbersome traditional banks, which are still there with full employees and processes and buildings and branches. And the second type is those banks moving towards digital transformation with more of online transactions and lesser impact on them. But the third type, which we probably will focus on in a minute, is our virtual banks or new banks, new in a term written by NEO banks. So, which has no employees or buildings owned by them. So this is the amount of transformation of AI we're talking about. We're not talking about a gradual digital transformation where it'll take us years to move from one to another. Now, if you look at the even, in the payment business, I'll put a quote from Gartner where they said 80% of the traditional banks, and that's Gartner, biggest research company in the technology in the world, 80% of the traditional banks will die over the next decade. And we're talking about 10 years from now. And I know in India, I've been researching in the past, there are entrepreneurs working on for instance, the virtual banks, and that started. But we're talking about the bigger banks. We're not talking about 80% of the 20% of the small banks and 80% of the giants will slowly move. No, we're talking about entire banking industry will transform. And that's not a choice, by the way. It's not something that they wish and decide when to do it. It's a competition that will firstly force them, and the customers' demand that will force them, because the whole e-payment and banking industry is driven by them. And COVID, no COVID, that will change, and the fintech industry becomes today is nothing but a reliance or a branch of AI. So the people who try to segregate that from other parts is impossible. And when we'll talk a little bit about the chatbots, chatbots is another arm or small arm of AI that you will see in years to come taking over the entire customer service, not only in banking, but in aviation, transportation, restaurants, anywhere that you talk to people. The people who have shown us during the pandemic that they could not cope with the amount of calls and interactions that is required. But before I get into all those as well, you must understand that there are three main pillars of AI. And I'm not talking about the types of AI, but I'm talking about the requirements and the necessities. And of course, the main part that AI relies on is the data. We're talking about structured data and unstructured data in terms of big data. So you could make smart robots with intelligent programming, but in the absence of data, you will not succeed. And this is the same thing that you will end up in, for instance, customer services, chatbots, in the modern banking. The data is mother of all requirements for AI. Just to give you back again examples on the pandemic and medical cases that happened. Look, even WHO, World Health Organization, during the pandemic couldn't rely on the data they had. They had to have a hybrid and APIs with others, with the Johns Hopkins, with the NHS in UK, and other hospitals, and I'm sure in hospitals in India, where that integration provided the data. For the first time in the history, you found both Google and Apple partnering with each other to introduce an API so that mobile apps can integrate with each other. And that has really saved many lives, if you like, because of that tracking. Now, of course, many Europeans will categorize that as unsafe, breach of data privacy, but that's something that we will tackle in a few minutes. And if that's really as important as saving lives, what we go. So of course, I'm putting the slides, but I'll be speaking in general about the AI and e-payments. And one of the things that we will see, and again at the end of this, is how to handle the security, the fraud management that comes with the payment and the new bankings. I mean, they are not independent, they're integrated with each other. that it goes. And of course, the data was one of the main pillars, as I said, and this is important for when we talk about chatbots and we talk about customers integrity. And the other part is the algorithms. Of course, with that amount of data, you need to understand how to handle it, how to categorize them. Of course, there are data analytics that will conduct that duty, but the algorithm that it goes with it, the specialized mathematicians, statisticians, algorithms, professionals will play a role in that. And of course, that has to be done accurately along with the business. Imagine you put a biased algorithms, unethical algorithms, or inaccurate that is done by junior professionals, that will take you to disastrous results. And of course, that even makes it worse than doing it manually. So it is important to start correctly, to start the behaviors and the teaching of all the models the way that you would like them to do, because you write wrong algorithms and the bots learn in the wrong way, and then you will end up having a huge, cumbersome scenario where you cannot even correct it. So we talked about, AI and the machine learning that's driving the decisions behind every levels. We talked about some of the back end, for instance, facilities and banking, the payments like RPA, robotic processing automation. These are handling most of the routine tasks that is done on day-to-day basis. For instance, back office functions that takes the data, analyze them, put a formula, does a comparison, make a decisions, goes to others, which is done by a huge number of accountants, with all the respect to them. That will go away with RPA and more sophisticated AI, if I say appendixes of AI. Now, don't forget the entire movement of the trends from structured and unstructured data sources. That has to be done very carefully. I repeat, as you can see here, these are the different levels of AI. You start with AI, then the machine learning, which is done with the algorithm, and then deep learning for more sophisticated activities, which you also use neural networks, for instance, in the medicine, etc. Now, new banks, NEO banks, and I don't know how to pronounce it differently than NEW banks, but these are the futures. Again, many pessimists will believe that this will only happen to small banks. It will happen to startups, but like everything else, like Nokia, when they were cumbersome, and I thought the smaller companies like Apple and others will not catch them, and they stayed at their own safe haven until they went bankrupt. I think the banks need to take this seriously and start producing new banks, even as a branch. These are the banks that has no, again, offices. There are no visiting places. There are no ATMs. They don't have any staff that you talk to, any employees, and the entire banking activities, from saving accounts, currents, loans, the traditional online activities, which we do them anyway, will be all cascaded under the new banks. Of course, there are few banks already in place that I mentioned here, but and I will talk to you about the security of it, because the reliance will be basically with the customers and their mobile apps talking to the banks. And here you should understand, we're not talking about normal mobile apps that you introduced by other banks. The back-end activities is also done by artificial intelligence. So there are no people interacting with you, whether it's the front end, the back end, or doing the processing or evaluating, for instance, your loan request or your savings or doing a check and balances. That's the new age technology revolution in the banking. So we talked a little bit earlier about customer services and the chatbots. Chatbots also available in different levels. Chatbot is nothing but a front end where you have the programming and the algorithms connected to the back end with a lot of data. Imagine you call a call center today, even at the best cases without a pandemic, and how many times you have to speak to an agent at a different levels to be able to get your problem solved. Of course, you get 20%, maximum 30% of the problems. And I'm not talking about inquiries, I'm talking about problems here solved by the agents. The rest of it will take your number and you will be expecting a call the same day or in a few days' time, and I'll be transferred to the back-end stuff. And if the problem is still not solved by the back-end stuff and requires managerial interventions, then you either have to write a letter or visit them or get another phone call, which is all in all means more frustration, anxiety, and lengthier time for decisions. Now, of course, with chatbots, you have all the data at the back end that can, within milliseconds, be available to the bot. The bot is the person or the virtual bot that speaks to you, and I'll mention here very quickly how it speaks to you. At the end, the decisions also and the algorithms will empower the bot to provide you with information or take actions, and that's part of, again, the new banks. Here, the bots are available through chat to chat, whether you're doing a WhatsApp conversation or you're doing a voice to a bot, or text to a bot, where you send a text and get a voice message, or eventually, and that's the ultimate aim, is to have a voice conversation with another bot where you have structural conversation with another human-like bot, but with a lot of information, data that can solve your problems. Now, again, we're talking about the focus on the customer experience on the new banks. Imagine how much that will enhance. Of course, there are a lot of security identifications to get to that stage. I'm for the sake of time, I'm simplifying it and putting it through the levels that we understand. And that was the conversational bot, just giving you some ideas on which areas and which other services that are provided. Imagine with aviation or transportation, you know, you have 10 millions of, and the same things in banking, of customers' data, where you have to go through them and categorize and provide all the chatting information. So we talked very briefly about the fintechs and how that even through Facebook nowadays, with many companies using AI-based bots, can handle the payments and provide the customers through the marketing tools, conduct a conversation. That's again a bot in the back of the Facebook which does that, and that's another level of marketing schemes that you can do. And again, I'll link this to the virtual payments and banking. Now, one thing here that you should understand, what are the main strengths of the AI? We talked about the conversation, we talked about interactions and the data, but why is it different than human? Why is it faster? Why it makes better forecast and better decision. Why would they be able to do a better job than a manager in the bank? Don't forget, AI is based on the data, and the data is nothing but going through the history of data, not only searching for the answers, but looking at the patterns in the history. And that's always your first step towards making a decision. AI will go through the history, looks at the patterns through the AI, it analyzes them at the second part of it. This is where we talked about the data analytics and looking at the data sets. And then it does the prediction. So prediction comes after a long journey of identifying the data patterns and looking at the normalities, repetitions, abnormalities, the customer information, what are the parts that are important, and based on that, with the supervisory at the beginning, it does make a forecast and decisions, of course. Now, as it goes and makes decisions and collects data, your data becomes richer. And the data here through machine learning that we talked about earlier, it learns more and more how to handle repetitive cases. And then it becomes a mature bot with a lot of accurate decisions. And that's 24/7 at any time at the speed of light, that if you like to do the comparison. So now that habit by many genius human being is not possible, even if you kept them working 24/7, which is literally impossible. Now, give you some examples and what the banks do. I don't want to go through that a lot, but again, as I said earlier, these are some real examples of the banks that has implemented those robots solutions, and they do 24/7 banking. You won't get the bank is working at certain hours of the day. Last night I went to my ATM to draw money, and I tried 2 ATMs because we can try more than one place, and both had the same response. There's a problem, contact your bank. And it worried me. I said, have they frozen my account, or is there something wrong with it? So luckily I had a friend in that bank, and I called, and he said, no, there is a network problem. That's why, this is the message that you're getting. Now imagine if somebody has an urgent requirement and you need to go to the ATM and do the cash transactions or get your balance, or that kind of message. If you need to call a customer service, I call the customer service on the line, about 7 minutes, no answer. So these are not really times for customers to be spending inquiring on something that you should be automatically through a bot being notified and given an information instantly without the human engagement. So right, we get into all that. Looks nice and futuristic, but it's not as simple as we put it in place. During the COVID, the entire industry, especially banking, hacking has increased, at least by 30 to 50%, depending on the geographical locations and on the types of banks. So they have actually used the online banking situation. Of course, the banking and health sector were very popular with the hackers, but they used that situation to do the hacking and introduce a lot of new ways, be it from the phishing or other techniques to do that. But one thing that we should learn here from the pandemic, and even before that, the hackers, of course, these are they're not called hackers for no reason. Those are genuine people, whether they are ex-technology employees or the people who have been paid as a living to do that, or the people who maliciously conduct those activities for certain reasons and on the dark side of the web. But what we noticed is that they're all using artificial intelligence to do their hacking. And why? Because it's an easy and immediate way to look at the patterns of your target, whether it's a bank or individual, to see what are the times that, for instance, the security is least monitored in that organization. What are the targets? What are times that probably money is being transferred? And many other activities is done by the AI-enabled hacking, if there is such word. So now it's very naive for organizations, and I say that in the past, to continue investing in traditional security measures. Of course, they are very advanced security measures, and with all the respect, security professionals who go through trainings, through certifications, they keep themselves advanced, but they can't keep up with AI if you have been attacked with them. So you need at least more people, double your staff. That means more investment. You need to put more boundaries on your network and your cloud, especially if it is on the public cloud, to protect your employees or your customers' data. Now, that means firefighting. They're always a step ahead of you. So my vision on this is you cannot continue doing that without starting to move your security defense in the organization and banking to AI enabled. And that's the future. You can't continue because the security, traditional security measures are expensive. And the return on investment on them are more than 3 years, 3 to 5 years. So the more you spend there, the more you can dismantle them and can't go to the AI. So at this time, to stop investing there, stop architecting around your network with even reputed organizations in the security, but focus on AI enabled, which is now available, but it needs to be more collaborated between the customers, which is yourselves, and the architects, like the algorithms and professionals, and with the solution. It's not as straightforward because it involves lots of engagement from different parties, and it's not purely security. So there will be less importance on the human, less importance on cyber security control centers, which are operating 24/7, but they don't have the similar expertise around the clock. So even in fraud management, I'll go back to the example of the virtual banks and new banks. One of the most important parts, when you don't have compliance officers or fraud detection employees, here you based it on AI-empowered bots to do the fraud management for you and challenge various sectors to look at it. And of course, sometimes it needs to be the whole ecosystems and having only few AI fraud management banks empowered through new banking, and others are traditional. It will not work unless the whole ecosystem is redesigned and revamped, which I'm sure it will happen. This was about fraud management. One other things I want to talk about before we finish is new banks have security challenges, fraud detections that is handled by AI, but also there is a privacy and data protections and ethical and values that goes with it. Of course, here we should be very clear that they are all not standardized in one area. You know, geographically, Europeans have different concept or different measures around like a GDPR for data privacy or human privacy. As I said earlier, when the Google and Apple went for the API interfaces, people or the health authorities in UK did not accept that. They wanted their own because they thought there is a data privacy on this. So, but that's not necessarily applicable to the rest of the world. Someone was telling me there are 92 organizations who work on the ethical values, and out of 92, probably none exists in Asia and Middle East. So there's a problem here. You know, there need to be clear understanding of the values and the culture of the peace, you know, people in the East and the Middle East on how they look at values, ethics, data privacy, data protection. Like, you know, when you talk about face recognitions, even in the banking, you know, does face recognition provides enough security measures? It does, but in some countries, they think that's a security breach to the data of the individuals. Whereas in other countries, no, but they believe that security is more important than individuals' privacy breach. So that has to be looked at globally and geographically to handle the concerns related to the bank. So thank you very much. I hope I have not exceeded my time, and it was useful for the individuals.